Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And I'm Brian O'Connell.
And on this episode, I finally got Brian to watch the 80s action film Predator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, directed by John McTiernan and written by John and Jim Thomas.
Two brothers.
Not the Wendy's guy, though.
Together.
At least I don't think it's the Wendy's guy.
No. Yes, this was my first time watching Predator.
I'm very interested to see what you think, because this was one of those movies where I sat back and I was like, what is a film that Brian has probably never seen and probably had no desire to ever see?
Well, you picked the right one, Sean. I mean, okay, I'll give my general mindset going into this. I actually didn't know too much about it. Like, I didn't even know Arnold Schwarzenegger was in it, and that it was the origin of so many pop cultural references. I mainly knew it as an 80s alien horror movie, and for the character himself. Like, I heard about it usually mentioned alongside Alien and The Thing, which strike me as like slightly inappropriate comparisons now, but I was basically going in expecting something.
I mean, just in terms of when it was released and that it had a monster in it, that's sort of it.
And the closed environment, isolation, paranoia element.
Yeah, the like ultra masculine.
Oh yes,
horseshit.
Definitely. Yeah.
Which we will obviously get into because I think it's fascinating.
Yes, the masculine elements of this movie are the most interesting parts to me. But anyway, I was going into it expecting a movie in the vein of those movies, and while it does share some plot and maybe even thematic similarities with like The Thing and Alien, I wouldn't really describe this as a horror movie at all.
No, it's squarely an action movie, which I think is what makes it unique. And, it's not like The Thing or Alien where it's more of a horror movie where people are running away.
Yeah, where it's
for the majority. This is like pretty much from jump a bunch of elite kind of like special ops soldiers who are like intentionally going towards this thing.
Yeah. I mean, the film I actually wound up thinking most of only because it's my only other 80s action movie reference point was Die Hard. Like, not the
same director, by the way.
Same director?
Yeah, John McTiernan. He did both.
Oh wow. I had no idea, but in retrospect, that does make sense. Not just in terms of like, the ultra masculine action stuff like that.
I mean, he has a visual style.
Yeah, no, there is a certain similarity in the all of the zooms and the tracks and like the kind of pulling into the characters' faces and everything.
He tends to do a very specific kind of framing for stunts too.
Yeah,
where it'll be this kind of like frenetic camera movement, and then also like very still camera movement.
Yeah. You can definitely see that in this movie. So I actually so that gives another framework for me to understand this. I really didn't know it was the director of Die Hard.
Well, because on the surface, you're like, yeah, it's an 80s action movie, but there's not much else that connects the two.
Yeah, no, certainly not in terms of plot or something. It's not, Predator is a very different film from Die Hard, obviously. But I do think there is a sort of similarity in the treatment of the protagonists, in a sense, where... So I guess we should... Do you want to, like, outline the plot really quick?
Yeah.
Before we...
I think it usually makes sense to just go from the beginning, and then when we have talking points, we'll bring them up as we go.
Right. So it's in a Central American jungle. That's where it takes place. I believe shot on location.
It was shot in Mexico.
Oh, okay. But it is... I do think,
But it is supposed to be Central America.
and they do
yeah.
get very nice shots of the scenery sometimes, which is a surprise. Like there is some good location photography, but basically it's these kind of mercenary rescue team people led by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who plays Dutch, who are basically trying to rescue some political official and some other people. I'm kind of fuzzy on the details, who are being held hostage. And
well, if you're fuzzy, that's good, because it turns out that that's actually all crap, and they've been sold a story to get them in there.
yes.
By Carl Weathers. So, okay, so we begin, and in one of the famous 80s cheese scenes of all time,
Yes.
Dutch, Arnold Schwarzenegger, runs into an old acquaintance, Carl. I'm just going to say Carl Weathers because I can't remember. Is it Dylan?
Yes.
I think it's Dylan. Yeah, I think that. But anyway, so it's Dylan, you son of a bitch, and then they grasp hands in a shot that is like downright pornographic. With
yes.
Just two flexing biceps, and you're like, oh my god, okay, I guess this is what I'm in for.
I think when I saw it, I actually gasped, because that shot is a meme and has been for like at least.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it's totally a meme. Like
I did not, because I've seen that image like all over the internet for like, I mean, it has to be like years at this point. But I didn't know it came from this movie, and it was
it's always fascinating when that happens.
It was like a jump scare for me, because I was like, oh my god, that's the thing. And it was bizarre. And I did, I had less intense versions of that moment across the film, because there are a lot of things.
I mean, like the other huge one is Get to the Chopper.
Yes, I know. I've been like hearing that since I was in like, God, at least elementary school, and I didn't know it was from this movie.
Yeah, Predator has a weird kind of history in popular culture, in that it wasn't so big that I think everyone's seen it, but it was big enough that it became, it made memes, and
it kind of filtered out. I know it didn't get a glowing critical response at the time, but it was relatively successful at the box office, and looking at the stats now.
I mean, I could see it not doing well critically. I don't know how Die Hard did critically, to be honest.
Probably not great either. I mean, I don't know. I feel like these are things.
I think the thing is, okay, what I like about McTiernan, but what would probably get him into trouble, when he was making these, is that you go into it thinking it's an action film, and most action films, sorry, they're sort of brainless. Not that this one isn't brainless at times.
Yeah.
But most of them are like very, very like
shallow,
and then not just brainless, but sort of like shallow, like just like some lady with her boobs out, and like some basically superhuman guy who like never gets a scratch on him, and it's just like unloading a machine gun while backflipping, that kind of shit.
Right.
And for better or worse, McTiernan, what I love about him is he just kicks his main characters' asses like so hard. Like Die Hard and this film.
Yeah.
Like these people get annihilated.
Oh yeah, and it's what interests me, and I don't know like how self-conscious this is, or how much of it is just like my contemporary perspective on it. But like you see the type of action movies you just referred to, right? And then you see movies like Predator or Die Hard, where it's almost like the platonic ideal of those movies, and it like, in terms of like, it's the most 80s action movie ever. Like, it's not just like, those generic trashy movies that it's cheap and sloppily composed. Like, these are relatively well-composed movies in terms of like, they hit all of the right beats for an action movie, and they have all of the stereotypes and the archetypes that we've come to expect from action movies. which in a weird way, like the intensity of it almost makes it more
Right.
interesting to watch than just like the ripoffs or the predecessors in a way, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense. So anyway, we get the downright pornographic bicep shot.
Yes.
And then Dylan tells Dutch that, the cover story, which is there's some political leader that has been kidnapped in the jungles of Central America, and Dutch and his team have to go and save him.
Yes.
Or her, I don't remember. I think it's a him, they say, but
yes,
it doesn't really matter.
It doesn't hugely matter.
So, we get the team, and they take some helicopters in. There's a bit of hate speech from Jesse Ventura.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the 1980s, but
yeah, it's sort of the 80s. I was discussing this with you, I think, off air, but
yeah,
we're getting a lot of 80s theme stuff lately, but it's all revisionist, where it's all,
this
not racist and homophobic, but like a lot of the 80s, like that was just how it was. Not that it was good. It's just that's how it was.
Well, what interests me about this movie and about 80s pop culture is that obviously Predator isn't like necessarily a documentary accurate reflection of the attitudes of
no.
But what it is interesting is, I'm stumbling over my words, but it's interesting as a document of the way the 80s thought of itself, if that makes sense. And, it represents like a kind of, not the actual realities of the 80s, which I don't think the revisionist stuff we see lately does hugely well either, but like what was valued in the culture of the 80s, what was it about, especially as regards men, with the hate epithet you mentioned being only one example of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and again, you could also get into, they're supposed to be military, and I've never been in the military, but I know enough to know they're probably not like, oh, bother, they're probably swearing up and down and telling large vagina jokes. Maybe not large vagina jokes, but...
Those jokes came off a little like...
Well, what I think is funny, too, is I'm pretty sure Shane Black improvised all of them.
Oh, my God. Well, I mean, you can kind of tell.
But it kind of works because everyone just sort of looks at him like...
Yeah, no,
what?
I mean, they... regardless of whatever, misogyny elements, they're also just kind of weird and forced jokes to me.
Yeah, they're just not, like, not told well.
Yeah, which, in a kind of weird, like, way... makes it more authentic. But I would expect that the improv thing is right, judging by the delivery. But yeah, no. It does kind of... I don't necessarily enjoy their inclusion, but they don't force it with the film itself. It's just kind of looks like the characters making bad jokes and nobody is finding them funny within...
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, don't worry about it because they're all going to die.
Yeah, no. Yeah, they do all die. But first...
Except for Dutch.
Yeah, except for Dutch. So can we talk about that? Because... Okay, I'll just get to my core feeling about this movie. I think the most interesting thing about the movie is the way in which it suggests a sort of affinity between Dutch and the Predator itself.
Yeah, there's a certain mutual respect.
There's a mutual respect. And what I didn't realize going in was that the Predator, unlike Alien or The Thing, it's like an intelligent anthropomorphic creature mostly. Like, it's not like, in Alien, it's kind of like a creature or a monster or something. And in The Thing, it's sort of like this unknowable dark force.
Yeah, the thing about Predator is it's much more of a humanoid. Like, it's not entirely like us, but it's similar enough, it clearly...
I mean, it has clothes and technology and... It has
technology that it uses.
And it seems to operate, like, with recognizably human motives. Like, it doesn't kill the woman, I forget her name, but... because
Yeah, in a weird way, it's got like a code of ethics. Like
Yeah.
it's the whole modus operandi for the predator is it goes to an area and it hunts, and it only wants to hunt the strongest people.
Right.
If you're weak or if you're wounded,
It doesn't take
actually
interest.
that doesn't hold up. But usually, if you're weak or wounded, it doesn't want to go after
Or
you because there's not
unarmed.
much skill in
Yeah.
that.
It's not and the thing is, it's a brutal creature and the killings are really intense and graphic, and the special effects by this are by the way,
Yeah, it was Stan Winston. I think.
who's like a very prominent figure in special effects of the time period. I thought digital, I don't know if digital would be the right word, but some of the more animated effects were not as convincing.
They didn't exactly hold up, but the thing that's funny is, in terms of the camouflage, we really haven't come that far in visual language from the Predator.
Right, yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think of anything that's done, camouflage.
Camoufage
in film.
is, I can't think of any examples. It is very hard to do.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to, because most people just make people invisible, because how else would you even,
Yeah.
like, how, it would be so hard to do it otherwise, I think.
Right, yeah. But anyway, the practical effects in terms of the makeup and the props and things are great. Classic, I would.
Yeah, that's why I always, at least for now, prefer practical, because they hold up, because the human eye can still tell the difference between something that is actually in camera and something that has been added
Oh,
later.
yes. And more than that.
We're not at the point with CG yet where you look at it and go, oh, is that a person? Like, you always know it's not a person.
I actually really am. CG used well can be great, but you're seeing CG be used to construct whole movies at this point. Like,
yeah, and when I watch that, I'm like, why wouldn't I just be watching a video game?
I know,
Like,
yeah. I was watching some of the new Wonder Woman movie.
oh God, that one.
Yeah, I didn't watch the whole thing. It was very bad, but
it was bad. I watched the whole thing, and it was bad.
I might return to it out of a sense of just sheer masochism to see how bad it gets. But it's full of pretty bad special effects.
Which is shocking to me, because it's like
millions,
the sequel to one of the biggest superhero films of all time.
Millions of dollars go into these movies, and and there was a video of the director going around where she was being interviewed prior to the release of the film. And what she was saying was, oh, the studio executives were a little like, I don't know about this. This seems a little weird. And I just said, no, the effects aren't in yet, so it doesn't look good. But once they're in, it'll look good. It looks stupid now. But once the effects are in, it'll look good. And it just...
So that sounds like someone that hasn't really worked with effects, and someone who's like, oh, shit.
Moreover, like, if you need all of these digital effects to make sure your movie isn't stupid, the movie...
Yeah, that should probably be your first inkling that your movie might be stupid.
might be stupid. But, and I've always, I'm going
to have a real quick aside on this. I think a person that's understood CG well is Guillermo del Toro.
Yes, yeah.
With the first Hellboy film, I've watched the director's commentary, and he talks about how he intentionally wanted to use as little CG as possible, but when he did use it, it would, A, be for just like enormous monsters that there would be no way to do otherwise. Yeah. But B, he would use it as composite. So, he would have Ron Perlman in the practical makeup, but then say if he had to fall off a roof and like hit a trash can, it would be CG when the hit happened, but then he would cut to Ron Perlman kind of like, in camera, like rolling on the ground. So it would be sort of filling in the gaps with motion.
Yeah.
Which doesn't always hold up, but it holds up much better.
And it shows a greater sense of care, I think, which is one of the...
Well, it also just shows someone who understands
film
practical effects and visual language better.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you're going to use CG when something's in motion, that usually holds up slightly better than when something's like stat. You know what I mean? Like if something's moving fast and you do it in CG, it's
Well, no, I mean,
the
like,
brain is like, oh, it's moving, so it's not. It wouldn't look.
it's just like I see soup. I mean, I'm just gonna go on a whole tangent about superhero movies, so we should probably
That's fine. They suck.
we should probably cut it off. But in brief, I mean, the use of these, I've seen it where it's basically just like a cartoon ultimately, because
I've seen behind the scenes stuff, and it's literally just like it's green screen, and that's it. It's like actors, and then an enormous green screen, and that's
like the Disney Jungle Book movie, there is like it's just one child on like a blue abstract set with like no props or anything, and it's just very like it's ridiculous.
Or maybe I meant blue, but
blue,
you know what I
green,
mean. Like
they're interchangeable.
Yeah,
but
blue, green, like just like someone's standing in a studio, and clearly nothing is actually around them.
And it's like, if maybe even if they leaned into artificial elements, it would be better looking. But like ultimately, we know where this road will eventually lead. And we all got a glimpse of that with Cats, which I mean is probably
it's just going to be all CG.
It's all C. Well, actually, okay, but the disappointing thing about Cats is that the sets themselves are mostly real sets, and the actors are what is animated.
Oh, right. I heard like the size of them doesn't even stay consistent.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No. That's. I mean, like. There are all sorts of problems with the effects on the actors, but ultimately the actors look so bad that the sets that they actually built look fake. So
it's like why not even?
I wouldn't be able to it's a whole mess, and Hollywood is. I mean, compare it with the pure simplicity of a David Cronenberg movie or a John Carpenter movie,
or indeed Predator. With their practical effects.
Yeah, where
it just makes me think of that BoJack Horseman bit where he ends up winning. I guess spoiler for BoJack Horseman. He ends up winning an Oscar, but it's not actually him. It's like this CG version of him.
Yeah, it's 90% like animated because they wanted to do reshoots or something. Yeah, that show, honestly.
But I just thought of that and I was like, that's so brilliant. But then I'm also like, is that the future?
I mean,
we've already had stupid shit like Henry Cavill getting his mustache CG'd out.
Well, we have they brought Peter Cushing back from the dead for Star Wars.
Oh God, right. We're doing that, the deep fake stuff too, which is always like, not only is it like...
It upsets me.
Just uncanny valley, but it's like, oh, why?
It's like, for me, it's especially if the actor's dead, it's like extremely ethically dubious.
Yeah, all the Carrie Fisher stuff just really creeped me out.
Yeah, I mean, like, you're using this person's image after they're dead without... Like, it's a whole thing.
But it's almost like a death mask kind of a thing.
Anyway, back to Predator.
Back to Predator, yes. Yeah, but it is interesting. We're thinking of all this stuff, watching a movie from, 1985?
1987 is when it came out.
87, okay. So it's a little later. Yeah. But I think the very telling thing about the practical effects is that, the camouflage stuff doesn't exactly hold up. But when you're seeing the suit, it's still, you're like, oh, that's a thing.
Yeah, and
it doesn't necessarily age it in a way that I think CG entirely ages stuff. Like if you've seen, say, a 90s movie that used CG, you watch it again, you immediately go, that's from the 90s because that's the style of CG. Yeah. But when you're watching practical effects, you don't always have that.
Yeah, and I was harsh on like the animated style effects in this movie earlier, but I feel like they have a charm that CG doesn't have. Like, I can't...
Yeah, I mean, it's iconic, like in terms of the heat vision, the Predator's kind of POV, the heat vision stuff. Like you see it and you're like, oh, this is Predator.
Yeah, no, you accept it in a way that I can't accept bad CGI most of the time.
So I researched some of the trivia, and I guess how they achieved it was they had someone just in a bright red suit, and since it was against the green background, they were able to, after the fact, manipulate it so that it looked like it was invisible.
Oh yeah, okay. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny behind the scenes stuff. Apparently, they tried to put a red suit on a monkey at one point for the hopping between the trees stuff, but it kept taking off the suit.
Well, I mean, obviously. And wasn't there like a lot of health issues with the cast or something because of the location?
I heard there was a lot of like Montezuma's Revenge type stuff because they were in Mexico with the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently,
yeah.
there was like most of the cast and crew suffered from traveler's diarrhea because of the water that they were drinking. It wasn't purified correctly. So everybody was sick and like, yeah, okay, well, I mean, it doesn't come off in the film, but...
No, it doesn't, but I think it does. Sometimes stuff like that, sort of behind the scenes, it informs the film, and it is supposed to be like people stuck in the shit, like in the jungle, just sort of miserable.
Yeah.
And you do get a realistic kind of sense of that.
Yeah.
They might not be in Central America, but they're definitely, there's definitely scenes, we'll get to it at the end, but like... Apparently Schwarzenegger filming all that stuff in the mud, he was just miserable because they were filming that at night and he was freezing.
Yeah, and there were leeches in most of the lakes and pools and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like between cuts, they would, or between shots, he would try to be near a heater to warm up, but he just like couldn't stop shivering because he was like, like it's cold and he's putting mud on.
Yeah.
And then he's in the water and he's probably doing that for hours at a time.
It's a lot of commitment on the actor's part, and that is an admirable trait that people did go to such lengths to make this movie, even if...
I don't think people would... Well, maybe sometimes. You get someone like Robert Pattinson for The Lighthouse.
Robert
obviously
Pattinson
was miserable.
is like at least 25% actually insane for the stuff he did for The Lighthouse, but he, no. I mean, a lot of I don't think this is necessarily a bad or a good thing, but modern technology and everything has certainly made things more accommodating for actors, regardless of the setting. And I think that you gain something in terms of like everybody's own comfort, but you might not.
I just think in general, you can always tell when someone is at a place reacting to a thing that is actually there.
Yeah. And
I just don't, even the best actor, I think it's too hard for them to kind of, even if they're good at imagining it, it's too hard for them to pretend like they won't always get it right. Whereas if there's something in frame, they have something to react against and like, like they can actually kind of choreograph where they are.
And if they've been experiencing that environment for an extended period of time, it also obviously...
Right, it's like a realistic
it gives it a
reaction,
grounding of a kind.
Yeah, okay, but we've had a lot of asides, so we should get back to the plot.
Yes.
So basically, they end up in the jungle. I believe the sequence of events is they find 3 men that have been skinned and hung on a tree.
Yes.
Which is disgusting.
It is disgusting.
And, Dutch is like, what the hell's going on? And we find out later that Dylan knows that it's actually a team he sent in. But at the time, Dylan pretends like he has no idea what it is, like why those men are there, he still doesn't know why they're dead. No one knows why they're dead.
Right, yeah.
It's And then we get to one of the more ridiculous... It's funny, because I think what Predator does that's interesting is it has your kind of typical 80s action montage, where it's just like huge explosions and machine gun fire and all that. Yeah. And then you get the end, where it isn't as typical, and it is very Die Hard reminiscent, where it's just one man sort of going against...
whatever enemy.
A creature or, a person.
Yeah.
And it's a little different, but... So what I think is profoundly funny, it's just a ridiculous scene in general. Yes. But what I think is the funniest is the whole time before this, Dutch has been like, we're a rescue operation. We're not assassins. We're a rescue operation. We're a rescue operation. And then the second they get there,
it's just
it's like everything is blowing up nonstop and he's killing people like without hesitation. He throws a knife through a guy and goes, stick around. And it's like, really? Really, you're not an assassin? Because you look like you're pretty good at it.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's very
It's so over the top. Like it's downright hilarious because you're like, all right, 1 explosion, 2 explosions. I think there's like 20 explosions.
an excessive amount of explosions, which is,
and then it's just like people just shooting.
Yeah.
Like apparently with unlimited ammo.
It's a lot, and I mean, that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier when I was saying that it's like an action movie, a traditional action movie of the 80s, but like pushed a little further, like to the.
It almost becomes parody.
Yeah, like
it's
not,
like very close to being parody.
Not quite parody, but like close to being like self-parody, because it just pushes all of the, you know, extremes of the genre to, you know, like an extra dial. So it's very over the top.
Because it's like, I've watched a ton of action movies, and I can tell you the general explosion amount. I would say it's about 5 per scene.
Yeah,
and that's a lot. And this one is like, it clearly knows, okay, this is the normal amount,
and then
and this is the amount we're going to use.
Yeah. It goes the extra mile.
Also, I was just laughing the whole time because I'm like, aren't you supposed to be saving a hostage, guys? Like what the? You probably blew them up.
Yeah,
now.
no, they're not. They're not a very convincing rescue team across the film.
No, for a rescue team, no. I mean, like a death squad, maybe, but as a rescue team, I'm like, I don't know that this is holding up, guys.
Yeah, no. The rescue team thing is mostly an excuse to just have them be there anyway, I feel.
Yeah, no, it's true. But anyway, so they find a woman who's
a gorilla.
I guess
a
gorilla
fighter.
Yeah. And then they find.
This is where we start to see the thermal, lighting stuff, I think, where you get the sense that they're being stalked.
Yeah, you start to see the predator stalking them. And you find out that Dylan lied to them, and it's. I can't remember the MacGuffin they insert that Dutch finally goes, oh, you were lying to us. But it's something like a piece of paper, or I don't remember.
Yeah. I don't remember either.
But anyway, they figure out, you know, the whole story was bullshit and that they were sent in there to, I think it was just to stop this arms deal or something.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's some excuse. I don't know. It's sort
really,
of flimsy.
I mean, they think the reason, at least I'm fuzzy on like so much of the actual plot mechanics, is because a lot of it does kind of just feel like, you know, stuff to.
It's arbitrary. I mean, it's supposed to. I think it's also supposed to be sort of arbitrary. Like it's not. That's not really what's important.
It's laying the scene. Yeah. But yeah, and then the kills start around this point.
Which is, I think, like, you know, when you come to Predator, that's what
you're looking for. And they're pretty good kills for the most part. They're well staged. You know, the cinematography is a little like overemphasized for my taste, but it is, you know, they're well done and well edited. I forget when it is in the film, but there was a shot I really liked where it's like it follows a trail of blood or something up a tree, and then it like reveals the body like tangled in the branches or something. And there are details like that give the violence and stuff like that a little more tact than you might have in a more basic action movie, I guess. So it's well done in those scenes. I think it delivers on its promise.
It does, but so the team. I mean, basically the rest of the movie is the team getting killed off until it's just Dutch left. Well, Dutch and the gorilla fighter, who he tells to go get to the chopper.
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, in terms of, like, the play-by-play, like, I don't know that it's important we go into specifically how each person dies. Because it's, you know, more or less, even though they're interesting scenes, it's just sort of so they die.
Yeah, and we all, I mean, we know everyone dies. That's... In fact, walking into the movie, you're aware that most of these people are gonna die.
I mean, the cover is just Arnold Schwarzenegger.
We know that this is is his story ultimately, and that the others are mostly there to be like honestly
Yeah,
just
like cannon
bodies.
fodder. I mean, I will admit that I steal this sort of convention a lot in my own
Mm,
fiction. The whole like there's a group of people and then suddenly it's whittled down to just one person.
yeah.
And I do think even the laziest attempts at that are effective in at least giving you kind of this sense of isolation because you're used to people
Yeah.
interacting with him and then slowly the numbers get whittled
Yeah.
down and then the sense of safety is
Is decreasing, yeah.
uh,
It's
decreasing with less and less
it
people.
is it's a much used thing for a reason because it is a solid foundation for conflict. Like it's even if you treat them as the most basic stereotypes, it is a strong premise generally to have that because it taps into obvious fears and it provides like a clear and coherent structure for whatever story you're actually telling. So yeah.
Yeah.
But as you mentioned on like the poster, this is really ultimately about Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he is basically, to me, kind of like, well, basically, the world this takes place in is an extremely like survival of the fittest one, right?
It is. It makes me think of the Most Dangerous Game.
Yeah, I've never seen that, but yeah, I know. I think I know what you're.
I've never seen it either. I'm just familiar with the source material.
It's yeah,
Yeah, it makes me think of that, or like Heart of Darkness.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Apocalypse Now kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
social Darwinism type, like, whoever's the strongest.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say Lord of the Flies because that's more about the
Yeah,
group.
I would say
But
Lord of the Flies is slightly different, but this is it's like it's basically, a primal, you know, whoever's the strong.
like most Dangerous
Yeah.
Game, I think holds up because it's about hunting
Yeah.
people.
But what I found interesting is the way the film, intentionally or not, it suggests a parallel between Dutch and the Predator because ultimately Dutch is the strongest one, right? I mean, like the pornographic arm
Well, it's
wrestle.
interesting because he is meant to be the strongest one, but like the Predator, they show that the way that he is able to function and fight is that he has an understanding of engineering and mechanics.
Right, 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 right.
Like ultimately, even though he's like huge, he sort of has to use his wits
Yeah,
to um, get over on the Predator, which I think is similar to Die Hard in
yeah,
that, like Bruce Willis isn't the hugest guy, but he's able to think on his feet and come up with these kind of scenarios where he's like, all right, if I jump off the building with a hose, it'll keep me,
yeah.
from blowing up. And in this case, it's Schwarzenegger ultimately just makes all these traps.
Yeah, no.
And he figures out that if he covers his body in mud, that'll cool his
Home Alone
body
style.
temperature, and that the predator must see in like heat vision.
Yeah, yeah. No, he uses his wits, right? But it's hand by hand combat at the end.
But yeah, at the end it is down to hand to hand.
And I do think you called it, not wrongly, slightly pornographic earlier, but like the arm wrestle at the start of the film, it does exemplify the film's ethos. It's just about it's about an arm wrestle basically, and but
yeah, I mean it's about a punch off, but with an alien.
yeah.
I think funny thing I read was the genesis of the idea for the film was somebody said the only person Rocky has left to beat is E.T.
Yes.
And it's like, it's basically like the guy that beats up an alien.
But I find it interesting in how it kind of blends into this sort of like idea of masculinity that's explored across the film. Like,
yeah, I was gonna, I went into this thinking I was gonna have all these really interesting talking points, like, oh, I'd get into proxy wars by the U.S. and,
yeah,
all this stuff. Ultimately, I did not because it's a lot of work
Yes, no,
to be able
there's-
to do that type of a thing.
Yes.
But briefly, obviously, the reason it's set in Central America is because the U.S. has a history of conflict in Central
Right.
America in which we basically either try to overthrow coups or stage coups using like independent actors to take out whoever's in government we don't
Yes,
like.
yeah.
So that's sort of the backdrop.
Yeah.
But honestly, they don't go into proxy wars that much. They don't really. There's like brief mentions of like other conflicts, but like it's sort of just the setting.
But it is a subtextual element in that, like,
Well, that's true. There is an element of it where, for instance, the reason they can't get picked up by helicopter immediately, which they try to after like one or two of them gets killed, is because they're in hostile territory.
right.
And so the chopper just says, we can't do this right now. It's like not safe or something.
Yeah, but
Or they would be discovered and they would cause like a political conflict.
but so Dutch is a veteran, right? Like he fought
Yeah, they make it sound like he's been
maybe in Vietnam,
an operative,
person.
like kind of an independent contractor in a lot of things. They mention Afghanistan.
And ultimately, what might be if I could say this film offers anything so deep as a political critique, it's to suggest that Dutch's behavior and the type of force he represents, which is, militarism, strength, an element of violence, more than an element of violence.
Yeah, more than
is basically the same. Like the Predator is also somebody who's coming to, as a stronger being who's trying to, there's not like a purpose necessarily that's explicitly stated, but
No, but I do think you're onto something where I think that is intentional, that you intentionally see this group in armed conflict kind of infiltrating and assassinating their enemies.
right, and that's what the Predator
and you
does.
see that first for like almost like a framing device.
Right.
So then when you see the Predator doing it, at some point you realize like, oh, the Predator is basically doing what they're doing, just better.
Yeah, it's they're on the other end of the type of violence they themselves perpetrated. And ultimately, Dutch himself is a type of predator in the end, and he only survives, in addition to his wits, because he is the most brutal, he is the most capable of violence, and he is the most, ultimately the most powerful of any of...
Yeah, I mean, it's a very primal concept.
Yes.
It's like, it's basically man versus nature, except instead of nature, you're putting in
an alien,
a predator. But it could just as easily be a bear or like a gorilla or...
And
a dinosaur.
And I think this reflects like a deeper ambivalence about like the validity of the victory, because is this really like, especially when it comes into ideas of masculinity and what it means to be a man, like being a man in this film is being violent.
It gets you killed.
It's being strong, and those who who fail to survive aren't, there's, what's that famous line? One of them says, I forget who, but like,
oh, I ain't got time to bleed.
Like, what is that? Like, you're bleeding out and you're just to preserve this idea of stoicism.
Well, to be fair, and this is something that no one ever mentions in reference to that line, but to be fair, the original line is, I ain't got time to bleed. But then the response with the character next to him is, oh, okay.
Yes.
Like, just sort of like, what the fuck are you talking about?
I feel like...
Which is obviously, like, everyone excises that part of it, but it's like, I think that's important for context.
Yes.
That, like, the framing is like, you're ridiculous. Like, and people use it now to be like, oh, it's super masculine. But even in the context of the film, it's like, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, I know. Like,
dude?
It's become like a famous like badass line, but in truth,
it's like use it
it's
shit.
like if you have a wound and you're bleeding, like what is like what's this charade?
I mean, I did want to get into that because obviously they weren't. I don't think they were thinking about it in these terms, but the film could be seen as I don't think it's as simple as being a takedown of toxic
Not a
masculinity, because obviously that's
takedown.
not true. Obviously, it's like kind of championing
But it
toxic
is
masculinity, or at least masculinity, maybe not toxic.
it presents let's just say it makes the traditional equation of strength and violence with masculinity, right? It presents that form of masculinity in such an aggressive way that ultimately, whether or not it's a criticism or a promotion is irrelevant.
I mean, I don't think it was meant to be a criticism. It's an 80s
it
action
provides
movie.
you a space to reflect on it, especially when, the Predator is another masculine figure.
I mean, I think the reason Predator works is because it isn't an everyman.
Yes.
Even like that would be a very different movie, and we've had that sort of movie. But the reason I think Predator works is at the end you sort of realize, like, oh, these are both basically larger than life, like
Figures, yeah.
like almost superhuman
Yeah.
characters. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger is not meant to be an everyman.
No,
Like, they show you very clearly, like, he is like
he's like a composite of all of the ideas about men, right?
like he's basically like an anomaly. Like, he's so strong that like he is not a normal man.
He is a kind of, so getting back to what I was referencing earlier with the 80s' ideas of himself, he's like the idea of, the most manly man, if manliness.
Yeah, he's like he's that really bizarre ideal that admittedly I have sometimes too, but
Everybody,
that, culture pervades that it's like, oh, if you're masculine, if you're really masculine, you're like just so large you can barely move your arms and like, you just kill anything that moves, basically.
Yeah, no. And it's, that's an idea of manhood that everybody's grown up with, in part due to films like Predator. But I think...
Yeah, and I don't necessarily...
But
I think some people maybe put too much stock in these kinds of films and these portrayals in terms of like it being damaging too, because it's like ultimately, like, you could give me 1 million Predators, that's still not going to change the fact that we've had armed conflict for hundreds of years, and that the U.S. intentionally puts out like Call of Duty games to make warfare seem cool, so they can recruit people for the army.
And the other ways in which these ideas of manhood,
and all the other ways that we, encourage people to go to war.
Yeah, and just generally how we tell boys and men that to be a man is to be stoic, to be violent, to be whatever. I think this film, regardless of its intent, but it's kind of a reflection of those ideas more than like a source of them.
I think the difference is you get the Predator, who almost gives you this framing device of being able to see that it might be a negative thing.
Because it puts
the same qualities that you like in these men are the same qualities you sort of hate in, or
the Predator,
ostensibly hate in
or
this
your fear.
monster.
It recasts masculine ideals as a kind of sinister force that can only be
which honestly it should be.
And that can only be stopped by an even more powerful force. And then I think it could, it provides a space to reflect on, like, well, do we really want those ideals? Like, is it really just like a matter of like stick with the strongest person? Like, that's not. And so
I mean, I do think it's interesting, even though, so a lot of this I'm sure is inadvertent, but even though there is a female character that I think is obviously just thrown in there, so there's some boobs, let's be honest. But at the end, she leaves to go to get a helicopter.
Yeah.
She's able to escape.
Yeah.
Because she's not trying to engage. She's just
not,
like, fuck this, I'm gone.
She's not.
And ultimately, I think if Dutch did the same, he probably would have felt, I mean, there's that whole like, well, he's the only one that can stop him type of thing. But it's like, no, I'm pretty sure if he ran away, he might have been able to get away.
It's basically...
But maybe not. Maybe he had to draw fire.
It's basically, he wants to win the dick measuring contest with the Predator. Is why
he does. But what's interesting too that Emily, my girlfriend, brought up is that the only reason at the end he gets rescued is because this woman happened to have the compassion to tell the helicopter to come back to get him.
Yeah, otherwise he
I
would have
don't
died.
think they would have otherwise. I think they would have just left
Yeah,
him.
no. I mean, because it's and I'm starting to my language is starting to, lose form at this point, but
It's fine. We're talking about an 80s action movie, so
but
that
it
happens.
has, I mean, kind of just bringing this to a general conclusion. I think Predator, it is a stupid 80s action movie, but
Right. There's no getting around the fact that, like, the primary intent is clearly, like, man go boom, like, grar, explosion.
And if you are entertained by those types of movies, this is a great movie for that. I think it does those scenes
Yeah,
well.
no, I mean, like, as a fan of action movies, sometimes brainless ones, like, it holds up.
Yeah.
It's got explosions, it's got stunts.
It's well executed. It's
Yeah.
pretty good cast, even if the characters are a little, artificial and everything. But it also it has more to say than I think a lot of people give it credit for. And
I think a lot of people, rightly so, kind of hear about the source material and see the box art and are like, yeah, that's not for me.
right.
Which is why I was sort of interested to see what your take on it would be, because I don't necessarily think it has much more to offer than being an action movie, but it's got enough similar to like Die Hard, where I think there's a reason we still talk about Die Hard and Predator, and we don't talk about like the hundreds of other Schwarzenegger movies. I mean, we do in like a haha, he was an action star in the 80s.
It's because those movies touch they resonate with certain parts of our culture and our society, to use a lofty term.
I think what it is ultimately they get into archetypal space and they get into like Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, for instance. I think of that when I think of especially Predator.
Yeah.
Because it gets very mythic by the end.
Yeah.
Like, it starts off where it's more, it's still obviously fake, but it's like, at least there's sort of a basis of reality, like, oh, it's an armed conflict and they're invading and yada yada. But like by the end, it's pretty much just a Greek myth.
Yeah.
It's like this strong man like ran up against this monster from another world and defeated it with his strength.
And it's to me, the question of whether the film has a position on what it's showing you, whether it's like promoting this or criticizing it in a subversive way or something, is mostly irrelevant. What's important is that it presents these parts of our culture to you, like ideas about war, ideas about, manhood and everything. And it provides a way for you to, it's not like an unthinking like promotion of these ideas. It provides a space, especially from a modern perspective.
It gives you a counterpoint, which I think is something that
it gives you
a lot. Most action movies don't.
It gives you room to reflect on these things in a way that.
And I was thinking about this, but I hesitate to come down on it one way or the other, because I don't think it's a black and white film.
No.
I don't think it's saying hypermasculinity is good or bad in one way or the other.
It's like films.
Because on the one hand, you could be like, well, it's saying masculinity is good because Dutch is the most masculine and he wins. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, all the team were very masculine too, though, and they got killed because of it.
Yeah, especially when it's something from the past, like the is it good or is it bad criteria thing for me seems like a simplistic one to apply. It's to me, the question is, what can we learn from this? What does this, reveal to us? And I think Predator reveals a lot in a way, especially, to a modern perspective, reflecting on the 80s or reflecting on our own popular culture I was going to say, I don't know if it's entirely black and white, but my take on it, and this might be just my revisionist take, but is that ultimately it does show that toxic masculinity is good, but it shows that it's bad too. It's complicated.
That, ultra violence, and just like might makes right it sort of frames it as being bad.
It wins in the end, but it's
in
an
the
ambiguous
end, yes, but
sort
it's sort
of
of like
victory.
at what cost too. They do have that shot in the chopper at the very end where you cut back to Schwarzenegger and he just looks practically inhuman.
Yeah.
Like he's covered in mud and his eyes are wide. He's clearly like PTS'd out. But like I think that's important for context too. Like they sort of intentionally have that shot to show you like he will never be the same after this.
Because
like, he is destroyed.
He's seen himself in the beast ultimately, I feel.
Yeah, like he's realized like maybe just how
dark parts of his own self.
Some of the things he's done have been.
Yeah. But
then it's also just a movie, so you can see him like punching an alien.
Yes, definitely one of those movies as well. And if you enjoy punching alien movies, or if you enjoy evaluating privileged pop cultural representations of masculinity, I think Predator has something for you either way. So I would recommend checking it out if you haven't seen it yet, like me, or if you have seen it, give it a rewatch. I mean, it has more.
In general, did you like the film? I guess is the important question.
I enjoyed watching it, yes, and I did.
Okay,
I did,
because that was my main thing. Was like when I thought about it, I was like, I legitimately don't know, which is why sometimes I like to pick movies like this to have you watch, because like I just think it's interesting to be like,
let's see what.
Here's a film that Brian's clearly never seen. Like, I wonder what he would think about it.
Yeah, it's not.
Especially since, you're much younger and you're obviously from a different kind of
environment. Yeah. I mean, it's not something I like hugely connected with, but.
Right. I mean, to be fair, I didn't really hugely connect with it either.
But.
I love the film, but it's not like I'm ever like, that's me.
Yeah, no.
Like,
but I
would be one of the guys at the beginning that gets skinned.
As an action movie, it is entertaining and easy to recommend, and I enjoyed
I just think like the reason McTiernan stuff holds up too is, just fuck the action genre. Like as a film, it works as a film.
Yeah.
Like it's tight. It moves very quickly. It establishes itself very quickly.
Yeah.
It's a very simple premise, but that like I think really works. Just this sort of like man getting hunted by an alien.
It gets it down, and it's satisfying to watch from that perspective. So yeah, I think it's an entertaining movie. Maybe not one like I'm like huge on revisiting, but something that I could easily enjoy. And
I mean, there was clearly something there because there have been so many goddamn sequels.
Yeah, oh god, yeah.
And by the way, I went back and watched, which I completely memory dumped, 2010's Predators.
Oh,
just to watch it, and man, the film has some stuff going for it, but ultimately, it's like I finished it and I'm like, I see why I memory dumped this.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like they have Lawrence Fishburne and he's there for 10 minutes.
That's how I feel about most huge franchise sequels. Like, you go back to the...
Well, also, they're trying to have Adrian Brody be, like, the main action star, and I'm like, I'm sorry, man, I'm just not buying this.
It's, the thing I find with, like, there are a lot of series I've heard about, right? And then you go back to the original film, and you're like, wow, that's actually something kind of unique and special, even despite all of the pop cultural stuff that's accumulated around it.
I mean, I think the one thing that I think of Alien and the series of Alien films, because at least with I would argue the first 3 Aliens, like they pretty much hold up.
Yeah. And
it's not like, the Terminator series. It's like people say the first and the second are good, but then the third is obviously awful. Yeah. Or Predator even. It's like the second movie, I love it, but it's super silly. It's like Danny Glover in the city fighting a predator.
Yeah.
Just like the predator jumps through an apartment and he's running through and there's like an old woman nude. And like, it's silly. It's fun, but it's really stupid.
For me, the example would be A Nightmare on Elm Street, because like I grew up in a culture at this point where Freddy Krueger is basically like a joke. Like nobody takes it seriously.
Yeah, no, I get that.
don't. But then I watched the original movie, And I was like, actually, this is a pretty good horror movie and effective and creepy and it has great effects and it's just, with Predator, it's become so abstracted from, whatever original thing it
Yeah,
was.
because you get into friggin' Alien versus Predator that literally has a shot where it's this woman with dreads and the Predator with dreads, and they're fighting the alien, and they're both running in slow mo at the same time, and their dreads are like kind of synced up, like beating up and down. That was sort of me. Like,
yeah.
I feel like that was like, okay, the Predator is dead.
Yes, yeah. But then if you revisit the original, then it's like, well, this was a good movie, and there was something to appreciate about it.
I mean, the difference is the grand total screen time you actually see the Predator in the film Predator is 10 minutes.
Yeah, which is important.
And that's very important. That's very effective. That's like with Jaws,
It's
and
like, Alien, kind of.
And Alien, yeah. It's like, and then afterwards, I think what I like about the Alien series is then you had Aliens, which understood, like, all right, so you're never going to make Alien again. So go the complete opposite way and just have it be nothing but aliens on screen and just kind of up the wow factor. And I think it holds up.
Yeah.
But it is very similar to Predator in terms of it being like, we're a group of Marines, except, they're like, we're Space Marines.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
still
like,
have
we're
to
sort of
see
obnoxious,
Aliens,
so you don't care that
actually.
much when we get killed.
Yeah. But anyway, it was an enjoyable film, and I thank you for recommending it to me. I am glad to have seen it now.
Yeah, I mean, I look forward to, I like when you recommend stuff for me too, because there's a lot of stuff that's out of my wheelhouse. You're like, watch, like, what was it, the Lazaro film?
Oh, yeah.
Happy as Lazaro. Like, I never would have watched that. And I enjoyed it well enough.
It's one of the things I like about this podcast is that it helps us both get out of our cinematic boxes a little bit and experience some new stuff that we might not otherwise have experienced. So,
I think that's important, just in general.
It is important. And on that note, thank you for listening. I've been Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson. Very quickly, I'm going to mention that we have a
Patreon. Yes.
That I never updated. But maybe by the time this is out, I'll have updated it. There is a Twitter account. It's at Celluloid Sits. And our main hub is Anchor. I believe it's anchor.fm/celluloid.
Yes, that's it.
But we're also on YouTube.
And we are on YouTube, yeah.
So with that, thank you for listening, and we have much more in store for you, and have a pleasant day.